The scream didn't belong in a town like Red Creek. High, sharp, cut clean through the sound of a dying engine and the last orange light bleeding out of a Tennessee sky. Nathan Calder heard it before he saw anything. His hands tightened on the wheel. His eyes went to the rear view first old habit, then snapped forward to the shoulder of Route 9, where a man in a police uniform had a woman pinned against the hood of his patrol car. She wasn't fighting back, she was begging. In the back seat, Rook lifted his head and made no sound, just watched, the way trained animals do when they sense something wrong before their handlers do. Nathan's foot came off the gas. He didn't know that woman's name, what she'd done. He didn't know anything about what was happening on that roadside, but he knew that sound. He'd heard it in 3 countries. Before we go further, if this kind of story hits you the way it's hitting right now, subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell, because stories like Nathan's don't get told enough, and I make sure they do. Drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this one travels. Let's go back to Route 9. The town didn't look like much from the highway, and that was exactly why Nathan Calder chose it. He'd driven through Red Creek on a Tuesday morning in March, pulling a trailer loaded with everything he still owned, which wasn't much, because men who spent 11 years doing what Nathan did tend not to accumulate furniture. Sophie was asleep in the passenger seat, her forehead against the cold glass, her mouth open slightly the way kids sleep when they've finally stopped fighting it. She had her mother's dark hair and her mother's stubbornness about pillows, and Nathan had stuffed a balled-up flannel jacket under her head somewhere around the Kentucky border. Was in the back seat. A Belgian Malinois, 8 years old, with a scar through left ear from a doorframe in Fallujah that neither of them talked about. He sat perfectly still, the way he always did on long drives, watching the road like it might do something unexpected. Nathan saw the sign Red Creek, population 4,200, and felt something in his chest loosen by about a quarter turn. Relief, not happiness, just the absence, for one moment, of the low-level hum that had lived behind his sternum since Kandahar. He pulled off at a gas station, bought 2 coffees, poured one out. That had been a habit too once. Pouring a second coffee. He was trying to stop. He filled up the tank and looked around. A grain elevator to the east. A water tower with Red Creek Wildcats painted on it in faded red letters. 3 churches visible from the intersection. A diner with a handwritten sign in the window that said breakfast all day except Mondays, which struck him as an oddly specific grudge against Mondays. And he almost smiled. Almost. Sophie woke up when he started the engine. Are we there? Yeah, Bug, we're there. She looked out the window at Main Street, 2 hardware stores, a post office, a barber shop, a pharmacy with a flickering sign, and said nothing for a long moment. It's small, she said finally. It is. Is it going to be boring? Probably. She considered that. Okay, she went back to sleep. Nathan pulled onto Main Street and thought, boring is fine. Boring is the whole point. They rented a house on Sycamore Road, 2 blocks from Sophie's new school and 4 blocks from the one grocery store in town. It was a small house, 3 bedrooms, a leaky kitchen faucet, a back porch that tilted slightly to the left. Previous tenant had left a hummingbird feeder hanging from the porch, Eve. Nathan left it there because Sophie liked it. He'd gotten out of the Navy SEALs 18 months earlier, following a medical review board that had clocked a partial hearing loss in his left ear and some other things they wrote in his file with careful clinical language that added up to, this man has seen enough. Yes, and fight the assessment. He was 33 years old and he was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Claire had been gone for 2 years by then. A car accident on an icy road outside of Nashville, February, a Tuesday. Sophie had been 6. Nathan had been overseas when it happened. He'd found out through a satellite phone call that broke up twice during the worst 20 seconds of his life, and by the time he got home, everything had already been handled by Claire's mother, who was a capable, organized woman who dealt with grief by making lists and checking things off them. Nathan's had stood in his own kitchen and felt like a tourist. Spent the next 18 months finishing his contract and trying not to become the thing that sometimes happened to men like him. The drinking thing, the isolation thing, the staring at walls thing. He hadn't become any of those things, entirely, but he'd come close enough to know the address. Red Creek was the answer to a question he'd asked himself a lot in the dark. What does Sophie need that I can actually give her? Stability, consistency, a father who showed up every day to the same house, the same street, said used the same small town where nothing much happened. He got a job doing maintenance contracting for the county roofing, structural repair, that kind of work. He was good with his hands, and he didn't complain, and he showed up on time, which put him ahead of approximately 40% of the competition. His boss, a round-faced man named Gary Dellums, asked him once where he'd learned to work like that. Military, Nathan said. Gary had nodded and not asked anything else, which Nathan appreciated deeply. The thing about Red Creek that Nathan noticed in the first month was this. It was the kind of town that looked peaceful from the outside and had sharp edges on the inside. Violent edges. Most of it was quieter than that, the specific kind of smallness that exists in places where everybody knows everybody, and the ones with power have had it so long, they've stopped noticing they're using it. The woman at the county clerk's office who lost permit applications for people she didn't like. School board member who pushed out a teacher for asking too many questions at a budget meeting. The way certain names in Red Creek opened doors and certain other names got doors shut in their faces. Nathan noticed because he was trained to map environments. Identify power structures. Locate friction points. In Fallujah, that skill kept people alive. In Red Creek, it just made him quiet at neighborhood barbecues. He didn't insert himself into any of it. He fixed roofs, picked up Sophie from school, cooked dinner most nights. He was a competent, if uninspired cook. Heavy on protein and vegetables, light on anything that required more than one pot, walked Rook in the mornings, and kept to himself. Sophie adjusted faster than he expected. She made a friend named Maya within the first 2 weeks, a loud, opinionated girl who liked dinosaurs and had approximately no filter, and Nathan liked her immediately. He drove them to school in the mornings in his truck, a 9 F250 with 190,000 miles on it and a cracked dashboard that he kept meaning to fix. Some evenings he sat on the tilted back porch with a coffee, just one, and watched the tree line go dark and let himself think about nothing in particular. Those were the good evenings. He had more of them than he'd expected. He started to believe, cautiously, that maybe this was going to work. He first saw Wade Harlan in late April. He didn't know the man's name yet. He was driving home from a job site on the far side of town, truck bed, full of leftover roofing material. Sophie in the passenger seat, eating crackers, and narrating a story about something that had happened at recess that involved a far frog and some disputed territorial claims near the swing set. There was a police cruiser pulled over on the shoulder of Millbrook Avenue. Teenage boy standing next to it with his hands at his sides and his shoulders pulled up around his ears, the way people stand when they are trying to be as small as possible. Yes, he'd intervened. The officer leaning against the cruiser was big, not tall, but wide through the chest and shoulders, with the kind of physical confidence that came from a lifetime of nobody pushing back. He had a crew cut, going gray at the temples, and his hands were on his belt, and he was smiling at the kid. A friendly smile. Nathan passed them at about 30 miles an hour, caught maybe 3 seconds of the scene. The kid's face, the officer's posture, the way the cruiser's back door was hanging open like an invitation. He drove on. And then Caleb said the frog belonged to everyone, because it was on school property, Sophie was saying. But I told him that's not how ownership works. That's actually a pretty sophisticated legal argument, Nathan said. He didn't appreciate it. Nathan checked his rearview mirror. The cruiser was out of sight. He told himself it was probably nothing. He told himself that a lot over the next few weeks, every time he caught a glimpse of that particular patrol car on the roads around Red Creek. He saw it 3 more times in Mays, always parked on the shoulder, somewhere, always with someone pulled over who didn't look like they were in any position to argue about it. He noted it the way he noted everything, filed it, kept moving. The evening that changed everything was June the 3rd, a Wednesday. He'd picked Sophie up from Maya's house after dinner, and they were heading home on Route 9 when the light changed that particular shift that happens 20 minutes before full dark in Tennessee's summer, when the sky goes from gold to bruised purple and the shadows go long and the whole world gets a little blurry at the edges. He heard the scream. A scream. exactly more like a sharp cry. Half protest, half fear. Yes, the kind of sound that gets cut short because the person making it realizes it's not helping them. Coming from the right shoulder of the road, maybe 100 yards ahead. His foot came off the gas before he'd consciously decided anything. What he saw as he closed the distance, a woman in a light blue jacket, standing beside a spilled grocery bag, items scattered across the pavement, a can of something that had rolled to the white line, a loaf of bread, two apples. Police cruiser pulled behind her, lights off. And Officer Wade Harlan, because now Nathan knew the name. He'd heard it at the gas station, at the diner, twice at job sites with one hand on the woman's arm, pressing her back against the cruiser's hood. Nathan pulled over. Harlan's head came up. Nathan got out slowly. He didn't slam the door. He came around the front of the truck and stopped on the shoulder, far enough away to be clear he wasn't rushing anyone, and put both hands in plain view at his sides. "Evening," he said. Harlan looked at him the way large men in positions of authority often look at men who haven't announced their credentials yet, with the preliminary assumption that whoever this was could be dismissed inside of 30 seconds. He saw Nathan's truck, the work clothes, the tiredness. "Back in your vehicle," Harlan said. Flat. Routine. Nathan didn't move. "I'm just checking if everything's okay," Nathan said. "Is everything okay?" The woman's eyes cut to him. She had dark hair pulled back, and she was maybe 40, and her face had the specific expression of someone who has been in a bad situation long enough to stop expecting help to arrive from outside of it. Cautious. Hoping but not trusting the hope. "He told you to get back in your vehicle," Harlan said, taking a step away from the woman. His hand had left her arm. Nathan noted that. Also noted the hand had moved closer to his belt. "I heard him," Nathan said. "I'm just standing on a public shoulder of a county road." Harlan's jaw tightened. "You want me to explain to you how obstruction works?" "I'm not obstructing anything." Nathan's voice hadn't changed register. "What did she do?" "That's none of your concern." "Okay," Nathan looked at the woman. "Are you all right?" She hesitated. Harlan's eyes snapped to her with a look that lasted about a quarter of a second and said everything it needed to. "I'm fine," she said, in a voice that meant she was not. She dropped her groceries, Nathan said, looking back at Harlan. "Is that a crime here?" The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Harlan was calculating. Nathan could see it, the slight tilt of his head, the flick of his eyes back to the truck, checking for passengers. Sophie was visible in the passenger seat, watching wide-eyed. Rook's dark shape was visible in the back. Something shifted in Harlan's expression when he saw them. The threat recalibrated. Family local. Not a good look to escalate. She was walking on a state highway, Harlan said. Less edge in his voice now, but not gone. Creating a hazard. On the shoulder? Watch your tone. "What's her name?" Nathan asked. Not confrontational. Just a question. Harlan didn't answer. The woman spoke. Isabel barely above a whisper. Nathan looked at her directly. "Do you need a ride somewhere?" It was a gamble. He knew it. He watched Harlan's face when he said it and read the flash of fury there, the specific fury of some who has built a system around people not being offered alternatives. "She's not going anywhere," Harlan said. "Is she under arrest?" "I'm asking the questions here." "Sure," Nathan said. "If she's not under arrest, she's a free citizen on a public road." "I swear to God, office." Nathan said it quietly. "Your camera." Harlan stopped. Nathan tilted his head toward the patrol car. The mounted camera on the dash was angled left toward the tree line, away from the shoulder, away from where they were standing. "Funny angle," Nathan said. It wasn't an accusation. He just said it, left it there, visible in the space between them. Harlan looked at the camera, looked back at Nathan, and something changed, not a softening. The opposite of that. Something going cold and deliberate behind his eyes, the way a man looks when he's moved from irritation to something longer term. "Home," Harlan said softly. "Take your kid. Go home." Nathan looked at Isabel. "You gonna be okay?" She nodded, barely. He looked at the groceries on the ground. He picked up the canned green beans, great value, and the bread, and both apples, and set them back in her bag, which had landed against the cruiser's front tire. No, he did it slowly, and without drama, and without looking at Harlan again. Then he got back in his truck. "Dad." Sophie's voice was careful. "Who was that?" Don't know yet, Nathan said. He pulled back onto Route 9 and drove. The rearview mirror. Harlan was watching the truck. The road, not Isabel, the truck. Nathan memorized the patrol car number. He didn't write it down, he didn't need to. 11 years in the teams had given him a memory for details that didn't feel like a gift anymore, most days. He got home. He fed Rook. He made Sophie dinner, grilled cheese and tomato soup, requested Wednesday meal, and sat with her while she told him about a book she was reading. And he listened and answered in the right places. And all the time the back of his mind was turning over what he'd seen on that roadside, with the methodical patience of a man trained to build complete pictures from incomplete information. Camera angle hadn't been an accident. He was sure of that before he'd even pulled away from the shoulder. He started asking around 2 days later. Carefully. The way you ask around in a small town when you don't want to be asking around indirectly, in the middle of conversations about other things, with the particular conversational patience that comes from spending years debriefing sources who didn't know they were sources. At Gary Dellams's job site, he mentioned he'd seen a woman pulled over on Route 9 and asked if there was a lot of traffic enforcement out that way. Gary had gone quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of a man choosing words. That stretch, he'd said finally. That's Harlan's route mostly. He a good cop, another pause. Gary had picked up a nail gun. He does what he does. At the diner on Friday morning, Nathan sat at the counter and listened. He was good at listening in a way people didn't notice, which meant he was good at being near conversations without being part of them. 2 booths down, a woman was talking to her friend about her sister-in-law, who'd gotten a ticket on Millbrook she couldn't afford to fight. 3 stools over, an older man named Earl came in every day at 7 and ordered the same thing, and sometimes talked to Nathan about football, mentioned something about that Harlan situation, and then visibly decided not to continue when a man in a county uniform came in and sat down at the far end of the counter. By the following week, Nathan had a rough picture. Wade Harlan had been a deputy in Red Creek for 11 years. He had citations for commendable service in 2017 and 2019. Yes, he'd intervened. He also had a pattern that wasn't written down anywhere official, that existed in the specific nervous way people talked around it. He worked the poor side of the county. He targeted people who couldn't afford attorneys. He filed reports that didn't quite match accounts. And he had a talent for making complaints disappear before they reached anyone with the authority to act on them. Had been killed. No one had been visibly, documentably brutalized. It was subtler than that, the kind of low-level institutional harm that accumulates over years and never quite reaches the threshold for intervention, because no single incident is egregious enough on its own, and the victims are, by design, people the system is least inclined to listen to. Nathan had seen that kind of thing before. In different countries, in different uniforms. He found Isabel Marquez through the town's small community resource center, where a woman named Pat ran a one-room operation helping people with housing applications and food bank access. He didn't ask about Isabel. Specifically, he donated a case of canned goods, which he'd been meaning to do anyway. And he asked in general terms whether the community center saw many issues with residents having trouble with law enforcement. Pat had looked at him for a long moment over her reading glasses. Why are you asking? Saw something on Route 9 a couple weeks ago, he said. Pat had studied him for another moment. Then she'd written a name on a piece of paper, Pat, not Isabel's, but the name of a woman who ran a small informal support group out of the Methodist church on Thursday evenings. And she'd said, "You might talk to Sandra." He talked to Sandra. Sandra had introduced him to Isabel. They met at the community center on a Tuesday evening, after hours, with Pat present as a kind of neutral guarantor. Isabel Marquez was 42 years old, originally from Monterey, had lived in Red Creek for 6 years, worked housekeeping at the county's one motel, and walked everywhere because she didn't have a car. She was quiet at first, in the way people are quiet when they've learned that talking leads to trouble. She had her hands folded on the table in front of her, and she watched Nathan with the careful assessment of someone who has been disappointed by people who seemed trustworthy before. Nathan didn't try to seem trustworthy. He just explained what he'd seen and what he'd found out, and he didn't promise anything. The night on Route 9, what were you doing before Harlan pulled over? Walking home from Hendricks Market. Her voice was even. I missed the 6:15 bus. I walk that road sometimes. What did he say to you? She looked at the table for a moment. He said I looked like I was soliciting. She said it flatly, without particular emotion, like she'd processed it past the point of flinching. I was carrying groceries. Did he touch you? He pushed me against the car. A pause. It wasn't the first time. Nathan kept his voice level. How many times has he stopped you? 3. In 2 years. Did you file anything? Her expression said everything before her words did. The first time I filed a report, I got a call from the station the next day saying the form hadn't been filled out correctly. They sent me a new form. I filled it out and sent it back. I never heard anything again. She paused. The second time I didn't bother with a form. Nathan absorbed this. Isabel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. She met his eyes. There anything else? Anything you know about him that goes beyond what happened to you? The silence that followed lasted long enough that Pat shifted in her chair. Isabel said, I have something. She said it like she'd been carrying it for a while and hadn't decided whether putting it down was safe. What kind of something? Isabel reached into her bag and took out a phone, not a smartphone, an older model, the kind people buy prepaid at pharmacies, and she held it in both hands and looked at it. 8 months ago, she said slowly, I was coming back from a late shift. The Route 9 underpass. Harlan had a woman there. Her name is Rosa. She sleeps sometimes near the overpass. She doesn't have anywhere to go. She stopped. I didn't understand at first what I was hearing. I had my phone out because I was looking at the time. I understood what was happening, and I just kept walking, kept recording. She placed the phone on the table. I don't know if it's enough, she said. I don't know what enough looks like. Nathan looked at the phone. He didn't pick it up. He thought about the camera on Harlan's cruiser, aimed at the tree line. He thought about the missing complaint forms. He thought about the teenager on Millbrook Avenue with his ups around his ears. He thought about Sophie. He set Sophie asleep at Maya's house 2 blocks away, about what it meant, what it really meant that he had moved his daughter to a town where something like this had been running quietly for years. He looked up at Isabel. Can I listen to it? She unlocked the phone and slid it across the table. Nathan pressed play. 22 seconds in, he stopped the recording. He placed the phone back on the table without expression. He looked at the wall for a moment. Then he looked at Isabel. Run, he said. Don't delete it. Don't tell anyone else you have it. She stared at him. What do you? Find someone outside this county who can actually receive it. And if Harlan finds out before then. Nathan picked up his coffee cup. It was empty. He set it back down. Then we deal with that when it happens. It was not a reassuring answer. He hadn't meant it to be. She deserved the truth about what this was, not a promise he couldn't keep. What he didn't tell her, what he was already calculating in the back of his mind with the quiet, clinical focus of a man who had spent 11 years thinking through worst-case scenarios for a living, was that Harlan almost certainly already knew she had something. You didn't need to know exactly what someone had to know that they were a problem. You needed only to know they'd been there, and that they'd had their phone out, and that they'd walked away. Harlan had been doing this for 11 years. He wasn't careless. Nathan drove home in the dark, Rook in the back seat, the lights of Red Creek thin and scattered in the rear view. He had a daughter asleep 2 blocks from here. He had a recording on a prepaid phone that could end a career. And somewhere on the roads of Red Creek County, a man with a badge and 11 years of practice making problems disappear had just put Nathan Calder's face in his memory. He turned onto Sycamore Road. The hummingbird feeder was dark against the porch eave. He sat in the truck for 60 seconds before getting out. Just sat. Old habit checking a perimeter before stepping into it. He scanned the street. 2 cars he recognized. 1 he didn't, and parked 3 houses down with a slight gap to the driver's window. His eyes stayed on that car for a long moment. Then the inside light of the house next door came on the Garcesis elderly couple. He recognized the silhouette, and the unknown car drove away. Nathan got out of the truck. He stood in the dark for a while. Somewhere in this town, someone had been carrying that recording for 8 months without being able to use it. Afraid of what would happen if she did. More afraid, maybe, of what would happen if she didn't, and it stayed secret forever, and Harlan just kept going. Nathan understood that feeling. He'd felt it in other languages, on other continents. The hummingbird feeder swayed slightly in a wind he couldn't feel. He went inside. He checked all the locks before he went to bed. He didn't sleep well that night. Not insomnia, exactly, more like the half-sleep he used to run on during long ops, where the body shuts down enough to function, but the brain stays on a low, persistent idle. He'd lie still for an hour, then be suddenly and completely awake for 20 minutes, listening to the sounds of the house. Refrigerator compressor, a car on the street, Rook shifting on his mat in the corner of the bedroom. At 3 a.m., he got up and sat at the kitchen table in the dark and drank water and thought through what he knew. He was good at this. The SEAL teams had a term for it, ISR, Intelligence Surveillance Reconnaissance, but the version Nathan ran in his own head was simpler than the acronym suggested. You took everything you had observed, stripped out the assumptions, and looked at what was actually there. What you thought was there. No, what you wanted to be there. What was there? One officer, with a documented pattern of targeting vulnerable people. One recording that might or might not constitute usable evidence. Yes, he'd intervened. One woman who had been carrying that recording for 8 months out of fear and had now told Nathan about it, which meant Nathan was now a variable in a situation that had previously been contained. Harlan didn't know about the recording specifically. Nathan was reasonably sure of that. If Harlan had known, Isabel wouldn't still be walking those roads. She'd have been found some other kind of trouble by now. A Dewey she didn't commit. A warrant from a neighboring county for something minor that could be stretched. Harlan had been doing this long enough to know how to create problems for people without fingerprints on them. But Harlan had seen Nathan's face now, had his truck, could run the plate in about 45 seconds and know his name, his address, Sophie's school, and the fact that he had no prior record and no local connections that would make coming after him complicated. Nathan ran through the geometry of it and didn't like the shape. He needed to move before Harlan decided to. The question was how. The local department was compromising, not necessarily corrupt all the way through, but compromised enough that a complaint filed there would arrive at the wrong desk before it arrived at any right one. County Sheriff's Office was technically separate, but shared jurisdiction and resources in ways that made independence theoretical. State law enforcement was a possibility, but getting access to the right person there required either a very specific connection or a very compelling initial contact. Walking in off the street with a second-hand account and a woman's phone number wasn't compelling in the way that mattered. He needed something cleaner than that. He sat at the kitchen table until the sky outside started going gray, then made coffee, fed Rook, and started on Sophie's lunch for the next day. Peanut butter and honey, crusts cut off. She'd informed him 3 weeks after Claire died that she didn't like crusts, and he had been cutting them off ever since as a kind of unspoken covenant. It was a small thing. He took the small things seriously. When Sophie came downstairs at 7, she found him at the table with his second coffee and what she recognized as his thinking face. "What happened?" she asked. "Nothing. Yeah, you have your thinking face. I have one face. You have like 4 faces." She poured herself orange juice. "There's regular face, tired face, something is wrong face, and something is wrong. But I'm not going to tell you face." She held up the juice carton. "This is the last one." Nathan looked at her over his coffee. 8 years old, and she had the observational precision of an intelligence analyst. Whether to be proud or worried about that. "Everything's fine," he said. She gave him the look that indicated she was filing this for future reference and sat down with her cereal. He called Marcus Webb on his lunch break, sitting in his truck in the parking lot of a hardware store 14 minutes from Red Creek. Marcus was former Army Ranger Regiment, 2 tours Afghanistan, then a transition to state law enforcement work that had eventually landed him as an investigator with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's Public Integrity Unit. Nathan had known him through a joint training exercise in 2016, a week-long counterterrorism coordination thing in the desert outside of Tucson that had mostly involved waiting and bureaucracy. And one memorable afternoon, when Nathan and Marcus had gotten into an extended argument about whether a certain approach to building clearing was suicidal or merely inadvisable, they'd stayed loosely in touch the way men from different branches sometimes do not friends exactly. but the kind of acquaintance where you trust the person's character without necessarily knowing their daily life. The phone rang 4 times before Marcus picked up. Calder, surprised but not unpleased. Thought you were in Tennessee. I am in Tennessee. Right. Red Creek, somebody told me. You roofing now? Maintenance contracting, huh? A pause. You call to catch up or you need something? I need something. Figured. The sound of a door closing, background office noise cutting off. What kind of something? Nathan gave it to him straight. The pattern he'd mapped in Red Creek. The specific incidents. Harlan's name. The patrol car camera angles. The way complaints disappeared. He did it in the way he'd been trained to deliver field reports, chronological, specific, editorializing, just the observed facts laid out in sequence. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Nathan had always respected about him. When Nathan finished, there was a silence. You said there's a recording, Marcus said. A woman in town has a recording from approximately 8 months ago. Audio, she told me about it last night. What's on it? Harlan threatening a homeless woman. Specific language about what would happen if she talked to anyone about his stops. Dates. Another silence. Part of it. How solid is she? The woman with the recording. Solid enough to have kept it for 8 months without breaking. Nathan paused. Scared, though. Reasonably scared. Yeah. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Calder, I have to be straight with you. This comes in as a community complaint. It goes through channels that aren't always. It depends on who picks it up and what's on their desk, and about 12 other factors that don't have anything to do with whether the thing is real. What I'm saying is I can try to get this to someone in our unit specifically. That's different from filing through normal intake. But I need the recording to be part of the initial contact, not something you describe to me. You understand? Yes. And the woman has to be willing to participate. Just hand over the phone and disappear. Nathan thought about Isabel's hands folded on the table. Careful way she'd said, I have something, like she was testing the weight of the words before committing to them. I'll talk to her, Nathan said. Okay. Get me the recording and a statement of circumstances, who, when, where, was happening on the nights she was stopped. Doesn't have to be formal, just consistent, a pause. And Calder. Yeah, if this officer has been doing this for 11 years and the local department hasn't touched him, there's a reason. Be careful about who knows you're making this call. Body knows. Good, keep it that way. Nathan hung up. He sat in the parking lot for a while. A man came out of the hardware store with a cart full of lumber and wrestled it toward to pick up 3 spaces down, swearing under his breath when a 2x4 slid off the cart. Nathan watched without seeing him. He had a path. Narrow, with bad visibility on both sides, and it required Isabel to walk it with him. But it was a path. He drove back to Red Creek. He met Isabel again 2 days later. Same place. Pat present again. Coffee on the table this time, because Pat had decided that difficult conversations required coffee. Nathan explained what Marcus had told him. He didn't oversell it. He laid it out the same way he'd laid it out to Marcus. Here's what we have, here's what we need, here's what the risk looks like if we move, and here's what it looks like if we don't. Isabel listened with her hands around her mug. He'll know it was me, she said when he finished. He'll suspect it eventually, no matter what. The question is whether he finds out before or after the recording is in the hands of someone who can actually use it. If he finds out before, that's the part we control with timing. She was quieted for a long moment. I've been carrying that phone for 8 months, she said. Didn't show it to anyone, because I didn't know who to show it to. And because she stopped, looked at her coffee. Because I've seen what happens when people like me try to use what little they have. It just gets taken from them, and nothing changes, and they end up in a worse place than before. Nathan didn't tell her she was wrong to think that, because she wasn't wrong to think that. It had happened. It happened regularly. He was asking her to take a risk that was real, and that would fall harder on her than on anyone else if it went sideways. Can't promise you it goes the way it should, he said. I can tell you that I know the person I'm handing this to personally, that he's outside the county and outside the local department, that your recording is the difference between this being a conversation and this being a case. Pat said quietly, Isabel. Isabel looked at her. You told Sandra? Sandra sent him to me. I've known Nathan 3 months. Pat chose her words carefully. He fixed the water heater in this building when it broke in February. He didn't charge me. It was a small reference point. Nathan hadn't even thought about that. Isabel looked at him. Why are you doing this? It was a reasonable question, and he'd expected it. He thought about it for a moment before answering, because he didn't want to give her the answer that sounded right. He wanted to give her the actual one. I moved here so my daughter would grow up somewhere safe, he said. And then I found out what was happening in the place I moved her to. Partly that, he paused. Partly I just don't do well watching things like this. Isabel looked at him for a long moment. Then she unlocked the phone and handed it across the table. Nathan sent the file to Marcus the following morning. Transferred through a secure channel, Marcus had given him an encrypted upload link generated through the TBI's external intake system, designed for exactly the kind of sensitive submission. He attached a written account of Isabel's 3 encounters with Harlan, the incident on Route 9 that Nathan had personally witnessed, and a detailed note on the complaint process failures he'd been able to document through conversations around town. He spent 4 hours on the written account, writing and rewriting until it was tight and Sorsen said nothing it couldn't back up. Marcus acknowledged receipt 20 minutes later with a text that said only, "Got it. We'll confirm contact within 72 hours. For 3 days, nothing happened." Nathan went to work. He fixed a section of commercial roofing on a building downtown, straightforward job that required more patience than skill. The old flashing had been improperly seated for years, and the fix was less about doing something complex than undoing something careless. He was good at that. He'd always been better at identifying what was wrong with a thing than at explaining what right looked like. Sophie had a school concert on Thursday recorder and some kind of percussion arrangement that her music teacher, a young, enthusiastic man named Mr. Eds, described as experimental, and which Nathan described mentally as a lot. He sat in the school gymnasium with other parents and watched his daughter stand in the third row and play her part with the specific focused expression she put on when she was determined to do something correctly. And yet he felt the familiar ache, that came with those moments, the wish that Claire could see her, the guilt that came with the wish, the love underneath both of those that didn't have a clean name. After the concert, in the parking lot, Sophie walked beside him with her recorder case, swinging. "Did you like it?" "I did. Mr. Ed says we're going to do a jazz piece next semester." "Jazz is harder, I know. That's why it's more interesting." She looked up at him. "You have the something is wrong, but I'm not going to tell you face again. I'm thinking about roofing." "No, you're not." He unlocked the truck. "Get in, bug." She got in. She didn't push it further, but she watched him from the passenger seat as he started the engine, the way she sometimes watched him when she was trying to solve something she hadn't been given enough information to solve. She was entirely too perceptive for his comfort. On Friday, Marcus called. "We have a problem," he said, and the way he said it told Nathan everything about the shape of the problem before he said anything else. Harlan knows. A pause. Not specifically. But there's been a conversation in the department. Someone sits inside the local station got wind that a complaint was in progress. The specific details aren't clear yet, but they flagged it up the chain in a way that suggests they're not interested in cooperating. Nathan was standing in his driveway. He'd gotten home 20 minutes earlier and hadn't gone inside yet. "What does that mean for the recording?" "The recording is secure. It's in our system. That's not going away." Marcus's voice was measured. "What it means is that the clock changed. The local department is now aware something is moving, which means Harlan is probably aware something is moving, which means the woman who gave me the recording is in a more exposed position than she was a week ago." Nathan was already doing math. How fast could Harlan identify Isabel as the source? She'd been stopped 3 times. She was already on his radar. And if Harlan had someone inside the county who had flagged the complaint, they might have seen enough of the documentation to recognize the detail about Route 9. Isabel's name, her address. "How long before your unit can move?" Nathan asked. "We're talking about a formal request for county cooperation, which requires pause. Realistically, 2 weeks minimum. We're coordinating with the DA's office. We need..." "She can't wait 2 weeks. Calder, Marcus, you know what I'm telling you." Your pause. "Longer this time. Get her somewhere safe." Running creates a legal complication we don't need. But if she has family elsewhere or a place she can stay that isn't her usual address, I'll handle it. He hung up and went inside. He sat at the kitchen table for about 90 seconds. Then he put his jacket back on, told Sophie he'd be back in an hour, confirmed that Maya's mother, Jennifer, reliable, competent, she'd looked after Sophie before could come over for an hour if needed, and drove to the address he had for Isabel on Callaway Street. She wasn't home. Her neighbor, an older woman in a floral housecoat who'd come out to see who was knocking, said she'd seen Isabel leave on foot, maybe an hour ago, in the direction of Hendricks Market. Nathan got back in the truck. Hendricks Market was 11 blocks from Callaway Street, and there was one direct route that ran partly along the Route 9 service road. He drove fast. He found her 2 blocks from the market, walking back with a plastic bag in each hand and her eyes on the pavement in front of her. She hadn't heard his truck, because the wind was coming from the wrong direction, and there was a bus at the corner running its engine. Pulled alongside and lowered the window. No, she looked up, and he saw immediately that something was wrong. Her face wasn't scared. It was the thing past scared, the flat calm that people get when fears run its cycle and what's left is just the fact of it. Get in, he said. He called me, she said, through the window. Nathan put the truck in park. When? An hour ago. My work phone. Her voice was even. Careful. Like she was explaining something to someone who would need to understand it quickly. He said that he heard I'd been spreading lies about officers and that he was going to make sure it was investigated. He used the word investigated about 4 times. Did he threaten you directly? Pause. That's the thing. He didn't say anything that was technically a threat. He was very polite about it. She looked at Nathan. That's how I knew it was a threat. Nathan got out of the truck and took the grocery bags from her hands and put them in the truck bed and held the passenger door open. She got in. Rook shifted in the back to look at her, then settled again. Nathan got in and didn't start the engine immediately. He sat for a moment. He knows we're moving, he said. Doesn't know exactly what we have, but he knows the direction. What do? We don't change anything that would look like running. You go to work. You keep your routines. But you don't walk alone at night, and you don't take the Route 9 service road. And I'm going to talk to someone who can get a state investigator to Red Creek faster than 2 weeks. Can you do that? I don't know, he said honestly. But I know who to ask. He started the truck and drove her home. He waited until she was inside with her door locked before he pulled away from the curb. He sat at the stop sign at the end of Callaway Street for a moment, hands on the wheel, and let himself think about the shape of this clearly. Harlan was good at this. 11 years of practice good. He knew how to apply pressure without leaving marks. He knew how to make people reconsider without saying anything on record that could be used against him. He'd done exactly that, a perfectly polite phone call, full of loaded language and 0 prosecutable content, designed to let Isabel know that he knew, and that knowing was enough. Nathan understood the psychology of it because he'd encountered the same thing on the other side of the world in people who used it as a tool of control. Violence itself. The implication of violence applied with enough precision that the target did the work of frightening themselves, and the actor walked away clean. Pulled onto Main Street. 3 blocks down, Harlan's patrol car was parked outside the diner. Moving, just there. Pointed in the direction Nathan was driving. Nathan drove past without varying his speed. In his side mirror, he watched the cruiser. Didn't move, but he could see the silhouette behind the wheel, and that silhouette was watching his truck, and both of them knew it, and that was the whole point. Nathan turned onto Sycamore Road and parked in his driveway and sat there for a minute in the quiet. The hummingbird feeder was still. The light in the kitchen was on Sophie, probably reading or drawing, waiting for him. The Garcias' dog was barking at something 2 houses down the way it always did around dinner time. Small. His. He got out of the truck. He'd been a SEAL for 11 years, and in that time he'd been in situations with worse geometry than this. Fire on 3 sides. No extraction for 6 hours. Equipment. Failure in a hostage environment where failure looked like something Nathan didn't let himself think about after dark. He'd made decisions in those situations that were correct and decisions that were wrong, and he'd lived with both, the way you live with things that can't be undone. He understood what it felt like to be the thing between danger and someone who couldn't protect themselves. He understood it, intervened. He understood it in his body, the way you understand things that have been trained into you past the point of thought. What he hadn't understood until recently was how that felt without the team. Without the radio traffic, the pre-mission brief, the men on your left and right who'd trained 1,000 hours for exactly this. Yeah, without the infrastructure of an organization that had decided the mission was worth running. This was just him. Him and Rook, and an encrypted file in a state database, and a woman with a prepaid phone who'd been carrying 8 months of fear, a narrow window that was getting narrower. He went inside. Sophie was at the kitchen table with a book, a bowl of crackers beside her, and she looked up when he came in. No, and her face did the thing it sometimes did when she was deciding whether to ask or not. She decided not to. So, she looked back at her book. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, watching her, and thought about what Harlan had said the night on Route 9. Take your kid. Go home. He'd meant it as a dismissal, as a statement about the hierarchy of things. Harlan on one side with his badge and his cruiser and 11 years of practice, and Nathan on the other side with his work clothes and his tired truck and his little girl. Home. You don't belong in this. Nathan went to the refrigerator and started pulling things out for dinner. He wasn't going anywhere. He made pasta that night. Nothing complicated. Jarred sauce, ground turkey, the box of pen Sophie preferred, because she said rotini was structurally unsound, which was a phrase she had picked up from somewhere and applied to approximately everything she didn't like. He cooked, and she sat at the table and read, and Rook lay on the kitchen floor between them like a draft stopper. And it was ordinary enough that Nathan almost let himself believe the ordinary was the whole of it. Almost. He called Marcus again after Sophie went to bed, standing on the back porch in the dark, voice low, watching the tree line. She got a call, Nathan said. From Harlan. Polite. Calibrated. When today? While I was trying to reach her. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He's accelerating. That's actually useful. If she'll document the call time, content, exact language that's contact with a potential witness, that's something we can work with on the obstruction angle. Marcus, 2 weeks is too long. I know. I need you to tell me what moves the timeline. A long pause. The kind of pause that meant the answer existed, but cost something to say. There's a credible imminent threat, Marcus said carefully. We can apply for emergency jurisdiction. That's a different process. Shorter. What does credible imminent threat look like on paper? It looks like more than a phone call. Nathan stared at the dark tree line. Calder. Don't do anything that gives him a reason to arrest you. That's the one thing that buries this. I won't. He went back inside. He washed the dinner dishes. He checked the locks, all of them, front and back, and the window latches on the ground floor, and told himself it was habit and not fear. It was both, and he was honest enough with himself to know the difference didn't matter much. He went to bed. He lay there and listened to the house and thought about the geometry. The next week was a specific kind of bad. Dramatic, nothing broke open. No confrontation. No moment where the tension discharged. It was the sustained pressure of knowing something was building and not being able to see exactly where it was building toward, which was in some ways worse than a direct threat, because direct threats had a shape you could work with. Harlan didn't approach Nathan. He didn't approach Isabel again directly. What he did was subtler and more deliberate than that. Isabel called Nathan on Monday to tell him that her manager at the motel had pulled her aside and informed her that her scheduling was being restructured, fewer hours, different shifts, less consistent income. Her manager was apologetic and vague and looked like he'd rather be having any other conversation. He was a small man in a difficult position who clearly didn't want to be in it. Isabel said she understood. She'd said it to his face in the careful, even way she had of accepting things she couldn't fight. And then she'd called Nathan from the parking lot. Yes, and her voice had been steady, but her words came a beat slower than usual. You got to your manager, Nathan said. I can't prove it. Prove it to me. She was quiet for a moment. My rent is due in 3 weeks. He didn't say anything immediately, because there wasn't anything immediately useful to say. He filed it, added it to the picture. On Wednesday, Pat called him at the job site. Her voice was different than usual, compressed. The way voices get when people are trying to convey urgency without always saying the urgent thing plainly. Someone came in this morning, she said, asking about the center's clients. Said he was from the county health office doing a routine wellness check on community resource programs. Let me guess, Nathan said. He wasn't from the county health office. Called the county health office. A pause. He was asking specifically about services we'd provided in the last 3 months. He had a list of names. Was Isabel on the list? He didn't show me the list, but he asked about her by name. Nathan set down the tool he was holding. What did you tell him? I told him our client interactions are confidential and that he'd need to submit a formal records request through the county clerk. Pat's voice was dry. He left fairly quickly after that. Pat, he thought about how to say this. Think you need to be careful about who you talk to about this. I'm aware. I mean specifically, not just generally. A short silence. I know what you mean. She hung up. Yes, intervened. Nathan stood on the roof of the commercial building he'd been working on and looked out at Red Creek spreading below him, the grain elevator, water tower, the church steeples, 2-lane roads going in every direction toward fields and tree lines and the nothing much that surrounded the town on all sides. It looked exactly like what it was supposed to be. Small, quiet, contained. The kind of place where not much happened. Thought about the teenager on Millbrook Avenue. The missing complaint forms, the way certain names open doors. 11 years. The man had been operating for 11 years and nobody had put enough pieces in the right order to stop him. And the reason for that was so familiar that Nathan could have drawn it from memory without ever having set foot in Red Creek. People he targeted had no leverage, and the people with leverage had no reason to look. Until now. Nathan picked up his tool and went back to work. Marcus called Thursday afternoon with something that wasn't good news but was at least information. I've been talking to our DA liaison, he said. The recording is solid. Content is clear enough that it establishes a pattern. The language Harlan uses matches complaint language from 2 prior incidents in adjacent counties that were never formally connected. Adjacent counties. Yep, he transferred to Red Creek from a department in Hardin County 8 years ago. Were 2 complaints filed against him there that went nowhere. Our liaison is pulling those files. That's 3 counties, Nathan said. That's a pattern that exceeds anything local. That's the kind of thing our unit was built for. A pause. Problem is that building a case with enough weight to survive the departmental pushback takes time we don't. Marcus, I know. He restructured her work schedule. He sent someone to Pat's community center with a fake county ID. He's tightening, I hear you. How long? 10 days. Maybe 8 if our liaison fast-tracks the Hardin County pull. Nathan did the math. 10 days. Isabel had 3 weeks to her rent payment and a reduced schedule at the motel and a manager who was now in the uncomfortable position of having chosen a side without meaning to. Harlan was going to keep applying pressure, not dramatically, in ways that left marks, but consistently. The slow squeeze of someone who had done this long enough to know that eventually the quieter form of pressure was more effective than the loud kind. What would move it to 3 days? Nathan asked. A documented threat. An incident on record. Something that gives us grounds to request emergency jurisdiction before the local department can organize as a response. You keep saying that, because it's true. And if something happens to her in the meantime? Marcus didn't answer that. He didn't need to. They both knew the answer, and they both knew it was the wrong answer, and there was nothing in the conversation that changed it. Nathan hung up and drove to Callaway Street and sat outside Isabel's building for 20 minutes, watching the street, before he acknowledged what he was doing, and drove home. Friday passed. Saturday passed. Nathan took Sophie to a youth soccer thing. She had mild interest and she liked the running. She had complicated feelings about the team dynamics and stood on the sideline in the morning cold and watched her chase the ball with her characteristic combination of effort and strategy and intermittent distraction. And the tightness behind his sternum didn't go away, but it had company for a few hours, which was something. Saturday evening, he drove past the Route 9 underpass on his way back from the hardware store. He wasn't sure why he took that route. He told himself it was habit. He didn't entirely believe himself. The underpass was a concrete bridge over the service road, the kind of structure that existed in towns everywhere. As a piece of infrastructure so unremarkable it had become invisible to the people who lived near it. Under it was shadow, even in daylight, and at the edges of that shadow, There was evidence of habitation, a bedroll, a folded tarp, a plastic bin with a lid. Someone's version of a home, small and exposed and present. Nathan drove past. He thought about Rosa. The name on the recording. The woman Harlan had threatened, while Isabel watched from 50 feet away with her phone in her hand. He didn't know where Rosa was now. He'd tried once to find out through Pat, who had looked at him with the expression of someone calculating risk before answering. She moves around, Pat had said. It's not safe for her to stay in one place. That was the whole sentence. She hadn't needed to say the rest. Sunday night it rained. It came in from the west, in the early evening, the kind of Tennessee summer rain that starts fast and heavy, and doesn't apologize about it. Yes, he'd intervened. Nathan had been on the back porch with his coffee when the first drops hit, and he went inside and watched it through the kitchen window while Sophie finished her homework at the table. Dad, she said without looking up, can you stop staring at the rain like it owes you money? I'm not staring. You've been staring at the window for 7 minutes. I'm thinking. You can think at the table. He sat down at the table. She handed him a pencil, reflexively, the way she sometimes did when she was working on something and wanted company. He held the pencil and didn't use it, and she went back to her math worksheet, and the rain came down hard against his phone buzzed at 9:47 p.m. Isabel's number. He picked up before the second buzz. He's here. Her voice was flat and controlled in the way that meant everything below the control was not flat at all. Nathan was already on his feet. Where? Route 9. The diner, the abandoned ones past the underpass. A breath. He must have been following me. I was walking back from I don't know why I went out. I needed air. Are you inside the diner? I'm across the road, behind the auto parts place. He hasn't seen me go around the building. Stay there. Don't move. Don't make noise. I'm coming. He was already pulling on his jacket, phone between his shoulder and ear. How far from his car are you? Maybe 40 feet. He parked sideways across the lot. Is he out of the car? Pause. He's standing by the front door. Nathan, her voice dropped. He has someone with him. A woman, I think it's Rosa. Nathan stopped moving for exactly 1 second. Then he moved. Stay on the line, he said. Don't speak unless I ask you a question. He went through the kitchen. Rook lifted his head from the mat with the immediate silent attention of a dog who recognizes the specific quality of a human body going operational. Stay, Nathan said. Rook lay back down, watched him. Nathan looked at Sophie. She'd come to the kitchen doorway when she heard him moving and was standing there with her pencil still in her hand. Go out for a little while, he said. Her eyes read his face. Is someone in trouble? He paused. He didn't want to lie to her. He'd made a decision about that years ago. Maybe. I'm going to check. She looked at him for a moment. Okay, she said. Be careful. He grabbed his keys and went out the back door into the rain. Route 9 was 11 minutes from Sycamore Road. Nathan drove it in 7.5, not running lights, but not stopping longer than necessary. The rain coming hard enough that his wipers were losing the fight against it, and the road kept blurring. He ran the situation while he drove forced disposition, exit routes, variables. Harlan at the diner, Rosa present, isolated location. Lights off at the diner, which had been closed for 3 years. Witnesses on a rain-soaked Sunday night on a stretch of county road that most people avoided after dark. The geometry was bad. He killed his headlights half a mile from the diner and coasted to a stop on the gravel shoulder, used the darkness and the rain as cover while he got his bearings. He'd see the diner from here, a low, flat-roofed building with plywood on the windows and weeds coming up through the asphalt parking lot. Harlan's cruiser was parked at an angle near the front, brake lights off, interior dark. The headlights were off too. No radio traffic audible at this distance. 2 figures visible near the diner entrance, one large, one small. Nathan reached for his phone. Isabel picked up immediately. I'm on the shoulder. West side, he said quietly. Can you still see them? Yes. Her voice was barely a whisper. He has her by the arm. He's talking to her. I can't hear what he's saying. Nathan scanned the lot. 1 cruiser. Backup, which could mean Harlan was freelancing outside his shift, dispatcher, log, partner. Or it could mean backup was coming. He had no way to know which, and operated on the assumption of the worst option. Isabel, I need you to do something. Do you understand? Yes, I need you to call 911. Not the local non-emergency line. 911. Tell them there's a physical confrontation at the Route 9 diner. Witness, you're a witness. You need state police. County. He paused. Say state police specifically. Say you don't feel safe with county response. A breath. Okay, then I need you to record. Your phone same way you recorded before. Stop. Whatever happens. He hung up. He got out of the truck. The rain was cold and immediate and soaked through his jacket in the first 30 seconds. He moved along the tree line on the diner's west side, using the dark and the rain noise as cover. He was moving faster than was strictly careful and slower than felt right, and he knew the arithmetic between those two things was going to have to be decided by whatever he found when he got there. He heard Harlan's voice before he cleared the corner of the building. Told you what happens when you don't listen. Low. Conversational. The measured register of someone who has made this speech before and doesn't feel the need to raise their voice about it. Buddy's looking for you. Nobody's going to look for you. That's the thing you don't seem to understand. Nathan cleared the corner of the building. Harlan had Rosa against the door of the diner. Not violent, no blows. Nothing that would read as assault in a deposition. One hand on her upper arm. One hand flat against the plywood above her shoulder. The geometry of it designed to make her small, without a single catalogued action. She was a thin woman, maybe late 40s, and she'd turned her face away from Harlan's, the way you turn away from something you can't stop seeing. Harlan heard Nathan's footstep on the wet gravel and turned. Two men looked at each other across 12 feet of rain-dark parking lot. Harlan's expression went through surprise, calibration, and arrival at something colder in about 4 seconds. You followed me. Didn't have to, Nathan said. You're predictable. Walk away. Let her go. This is a county matter. Harlan took his hand off the plywood above Rosa's shoulder, moved away from her by 1 step. This woman is wanted for... Nathan said it flat. Stop talking. Whatever the sentence is, stop. Harlan's jaw tightened. You have any idea what you're doing right now? Nathan looked at Rosa. Go around the building. There's a woman on the other side near the auto parts place. Rosa didn't move. She was looking at Nathan with the specific expression of someone who had learned through repeated experience that men appearing to help sometimes made things worse. She's going to stay right here, Harlan said. She's not under arrest, Nathan said. To arrest her, read her rights, put it on record. Otherwise, she's a free citizen on a public road, and she can go wherever she wants. You're making a very stupid decision right now. I make one every few weeks. Keeps me humble. Nathan looked at Rosa again. Go. Seriously. She moved. Slowly at first, then faster, angling away from Harlan with the wariness of someone expecting to be pulled back. Harlan watched her go but didn't reach for her. He was doing math. Nathan was doing math too. Harlan turned back to Nathan. The rain was coming harder now, and both of them were soaked, and the parking lot had gone to the dark, uneven shine of wet asphalt under no light source except the ambient bleed from a distant highway sign. What I found out about you, Harlan said. Waited, Navy boy. Single dad. Moved here, what, a year ago? You've been very quiet. Harlan tilted his head slightly. What I was dealing with at first. Thought you were just a concerned citizen. A pause. Then I pulled your record. Find anything interesting? Classified blocks. Lots of them. Harlan's eyes hadn't moved from Nathan's. That either means you were a cook on a ship or you were something else. He took a step forward. Either way, you're in my county now. You're not whatever you were somewhere else. Sure, Nathan said. I'm going to tell you one more time to walk away from this. I'm going to tell you one more time to let it go, Nathan said. You've got a recording in TBI custody. They're pulling your Hardin County files. 3 counties, Wade. They're connecting 3 counties. He watched that land. Harlan's face didn't collapse. But something moved behind it, not fire, not guilt, something more pragmatic than either of those. Calculation of a man who understood for the first time the actual scope of what was moving against him. And then because he was that kind of man, the kind who had survived 11 years, by understanding that witnesses to inconvenient things were the primary variable he reached for Nathan. It wasn't wild. It wasn't clumsy. Harlan was a big man who had been in physical confrontations before, and he moved with the confidence of someone who expected size and authority to resolve the equation. Nathan moved first. Not dramatically. Not with anything that looked like the movies, no telegraphed swing, no fighting stance, none of the performance of violence. He simply stepped inside Harlan's reach before Harlan's hand arrived, turned his hip into the larger man's center of gravity, and used Harlan's own forward momentum to redirect him sideways and down, controlling the arm, managing the fall so that Harlan went against the diner's exterior wall and then the hood of his own cruiser rather than the asphalt. Harlan hit the hood hard, not hard enough to injure, hard enough to stop him. Nathan had Harlan's right arm controlled at the wrist and elbow, pressure applied at specific points, and he was behind and slightly above Harlan. The whole thing had taken maybe 3 seconds and produced almost no sound beyond the impact and the rain. Harlan tried to push up. Nathan increased the pressure on the elbow joint by about 15%, not enough to damage, enough to communicate clearly the cost of continuing. Harlan stopped moving. They were both breathing hard. The rain came down. Somewhere behind the building, headlights swept the tree line, a car on the service road. Or Isabel's 911 call being answered faster than expected. Nathan said quietly, "I'm not hurting you. Make me change that." Harlan was still. His cheek was against the cruiser's hood. His breath was fogging against the wet metal. He was thinking Nathan could feel it in the specific tension of a man running options and finding them reduced. Harlan started. "Don't talk." Nathan kept his voice low. "Listen, there are sirens coming. Not county. State dispatch. A beat. And there's a phone," Nathan continued, "with a woman behind this building who's been recording since I got here. Whatever you're thinking about doing when I let go of this arm, think it all the way through." "No." Harlan said nothing. The sirens were audible now, still distant but real, and getting less distant. Held the position and felt the rain going down the back of his neck and thought about Marcus on the phone, saying, "Don't do anything that gives him a reason to arrest you," and understood with complete clarity that this moment was going to be read differently by different people, and that the version of events Harlan filed, if Harlan got to file before the state investigators arrived, would not resemble what had actually happened in this parking lot. He was betting on the sirens. He was betting on Isabel's recording. He was betting on the specific truthfulness of wet asphalt and a patrol car camera that Harlan, in a hurry, had not thought to angle away from the scene this time. The first set of headlights came around the curve on Route 9. A second set, not county markings, state plates, visible even at distance in the rain, and behind them a second vehicle that Nathan identified, after a moment, as an unmarked darksedan, the kind that TBI investigators drove when they were trying not to announce themselves, which they apparently had abandoned in favor of speed. Nathan released Harlan's arm and stepped back. He put his hands where they could be seen and kept them there. Harlan straightened up slowly, turning around. His face was a specific kind of controlled, the face of a man reassessing every assumption he'd had about the evening. The approaching vehicles. Yoke looked at Nathan. He looked at his own patrol car's dashboard camera, which was pointed directly at them. Had been the whole time. Nathan watched that register. The state vehicles pulled into the lot. Doors opened. Voices, the procedural machinery of accountability, arriving out of the rain on a Sunday night in Red Creek, Tennessee, 11 years later than it should have. Nathan stood in the rain with his hands visible and didn't move. Behind the building, he heard Isabel's voice, steady, precise, giving her name to someone on her phone, describing what she had witnessed, recording starting still running, and he thought about an 8-year-old girl at a kitchen table with a pencil in her hand, and about what it meant to show someone the shape of a decent choice when you weren't sure you were decent enough to be making it. The rain didn't let up. Harlan was asked to step away from the vehicle. He did. Nathan watched the state investigator approach him, a woman in a dark jacket with TBI on the back, water streaming off her hair, face professional and unreadable, and she said, "You Nathan Calder?" "Yes, ma'am. Marcus Webb said to tell you the Hardin County files came in this afternoon." She looked at Harlan, who was being handled by her partner across the lot. Back at Nathan. 4 counties, as it turns out. Nathan absorbed that. "We're going to need your account of what happened tonight," she said. "Everything you observed. In order." "Yes, ma'am." She pulled out a recorder. The rain came down. Her name was Agent Diane Cruz, and she gave Nathan exactly 4 minutes to stand in the rain before she walked him to the dry overhang of the diner's collapsed front awning and started the recorder. She was methodical, not warm, not cold professional in the way that meant she'd done enough of these to know that the first account mattered more than any subsequent ones, and she wanted it clean. She asked him to start from the phone call, walk forward chronologically, describe only what he had directly observed, and flag anything that was inference rather than fact. Nathan gave it to her straight. The call from Isabel, the drive out, the approach along the tree line, Harlan's position relative to Rosa, the exact words he'd heard. The physical contact, he was precise about this, the sequence of it, who moved first, where hands went, what pressure was applied and why. He used language that was technical without being evasive, because he'd given enough tactical debriefs to know the difference between accuracy and self-protection, and right now accuracy was the only thing that was going to hold this together. Cruz listened. She made notes on a small pad, not the recorder. The recorder was the record. The pad was for things she wanted to come back to. When he finished, she looked at the pad for a moment. "You said you controlled his arm," she said. "Walk me through that specifically." He initiated contact. I redirected his forward momentum, controlled the arm at wrist and elbow, applied joint pressure to limit his ability to escalate, positioned him against the vehicle. Nathan paused. I did not strike him. I did not slam him. The contact with the hood was incidental to the redirect. Cruz wrote something. "Where did you learn that?" She looked up. "What rate?" "Not a rate I can discuss with you without your clearance level." Pause. She looked at him with the slight recalibration of someone updating a mental file. "'Kay," she clicked her pen twice. "The camera on his cruiser, you're saying it was aimed at the scene?" "Aimed at the scene the entire time he was in the lot." "You noticed that specifically?" "Yes, why?" "'Cause the last time I saw his cruiser on Route 9, the camera was aimed at a tree line." She wrote something else. "We'll pull the footage." She closed the pad. "Mr. Calder, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." "Go ahead." "Did you come out here tonight to provoke a confrontation?" The rain ticked against the awning above them. Nathan thought about the honest answer versus the defensible answer, and concluded that in this case they were the same thing. "I came out here because a woman called me from this location and told me she was watching a police officers with someone in an isolated spot on a Sunday night, and she was scared." He met Cruz's eyes. "I didn't come here to start something, but you were prepared for one." Nathan said nothing. Cruz looked at him for a moment. Then she capped her pen. "The recording your contact submitted, we've reviewed it. Content is sufficient for the obstruction charge on its own. Tonight's incident adds a witness contact charge and potentially improper use of a law enforcement vehicle. Depending on whether he was on shift." She paused. "You understand that your physical intervention tonight is going to be scrutinized." "I understand. His attorney is going to argue you assaulted a law enforcement officer. His attorney is welcome to watch the dashcam footage." Cruz almost smiled. "Not quite. Stay available. We'll need a formal deposition inside of a week." "Leave the county." "I wasn't planning to." She walked back toward the other vehicle. Nathan stood under the awning and watched the lot. Harlan was in the back of the state vehicle, not in cuffs, not yet. They were talking to him, and his face through the rain-streaked window was a face Nathan had seen before on other men in other circumstances. The specific expression of someone who has run out of moves and knows it but hasn't finished looking. Isabel was standing near the auto parts building with a second TBI agent, a young man who had the careful future of someone very recently out of training. He had her arms crossed against the cold, and her phone was still in her hand. When she saw Nathan, she didn't wave or call out. She just looked at him for a moment, and then looked back at the agent. That was enough. Nathan found Rook waiting for him in the truck, sitting perfectly still in the back seat, watching the lot through the window with the calm attention he applied to everything. Nathan got in and sat for a moment with the engine running, and the heater going, and the rain coming down on the windshield in sheets. Picked up his phone and called Marcus. Marcus answered in 2 rings. "Cruz called me from the scene." "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. She said you got physical with him. He put his hands on me first. She told me. The dashcam. I know about the dashcam." "Okay." A breath. "Okay. Calder, You understand that this is going to get complicated before it gets clean. He has people in that department. They're going to pull every record they can find on you to look at tonight and try to make it about instead of about him. That's the play. Let them look, Nathan said. A pause. Is there anything in your record that there are classified blocks? Nathan said. 7 of them. 4 from deployment, 3 from JSOC level operations. Somebody in the Red Creek County Attorney's Office has the clearance to open them. And if they try, they'll hit a federal wall. And if they go around, they'll still hit a federal wall, just angrier. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You never told me what you actually did over there. Nathan said. I didn't. Another pause. I'm glad you were the one who answered that call tonight. Nathan looked out at the rain. Get some sleep, Marcus. He hung up and drove home. Sophie was awake. She was on the couch with a blanket and a book, and the particular studied casualness of a child who has been waiting and decided to look like she wasn't. Rook went to her immediately, and she put her hand on his head and looked at Nathan. Everything okay? She asked. Yeah, Nathan said. He was soaked through, and he'd tracked mud on the entryway, and he was aware, like someone who had been standing in a rainy parking lot for an hour. Everything's okay. She studied him with Claire's eyes. You look terrible. I feel fine. Those aren't the same thing. She sat up. Was it the woman from Route 9? He paused. Yeah. She's okay. Sophie absorbed this. She looked at the cover of her book, some fantasy thing with a dragon on it, and then looked back at him. You fixed it? Started to, he said honestly. It takes a while. She nodded slowly, like that was the answer she'd expected. Change. You're dripping. On the floor. He went and changed. He came back and she was still on the couch. Reading now. Actually reading. And he made tea he didn't particularly want and sat in the armchair across from her and let the ordinary of it do its work. He was home. Sophie was safe. Rook was on the floor between them. The rest was going to be what it was going to be. The next 10 days were a different kind of difficult than the previous ones. It's the sustained ambient pressure of before that had resolved, mostly into a more defined set of problems with visible edges. Visible problems with complicated edges were their own kind of exhausting. Agent Cruz ran the formal deposition on the Tuesday following. Nathan sat across from her and a county prosecutor who had been pulled in from an adjacent district because the local DA had been removed from involvement, pending a review of his office's handling of prior complaints against Harlan in a conference room at the Red Creek Municipal Building that smelled like old coffee and carpet cleaner. Nathan's account matched the dashcam footage in every material detail, which Cruz confirmed without editorializing. Prosecutor, a thin man named Adler who wore his suit like he'd borrowed it, spent 40 minutes trying to find inconsistencies and found none, and eventually moved to a line of questioning about Nathan's background. Mr. Calder, can you describe your military service? 11 years. What was your role? Special operations. Adler looked at his notes. Can you be more specific? Pause. You're declining to describe your duties? My duties involved work that falls under a federal non-disclosure agreement. I'm not declining anything. I'm telling you there are legal constraints on what I can say. Adler looked at Cruz. Cruz looked at the table. These classified blocks in your record, Adler said. You understand how that looks. I understand how it looks, Nathan said. It looks like I did work the government decided was sensitive enough to protect. That's what it is. Can you at least confirm whether your training included close quarters combat? Yes. And you used that training on a law enforcement officer. Nathan looked at him. I used it to prevent a law enforcement officer from making contact with me after he'd already initiated that contact. That's a distinction. Your description of events. The dash cam's description of events. Adler wrote something. Nathan waited. One more question, Adler said. Why were you at that location on a Sunday night in the rain? Because a woman called me and told me she needed help. Adler looked up. That's it? That's it. Adler looked at him for a long moment, the look of a man trying to find the angle he was missing and apparently didn't find it because he closed his folder and said they were done. On Wednesday, Harlan was formally placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The announcement came through the Department's Public Affairs Office in the careful, hedged language of an institution that was not yet ready to admit what it was admitting, phrases like procedural review and administrative protocol and commitment to community standards that were designed to mean something without saying anything. The local paper ran it on page 3. Nathan read it over breakfast and didn't feel much. He'd learned a long time ago not to mistake procedural acknowledgement for accountability. They were two different things, with often nothing connecting them. What mattered was what happened next. On Thursday, Cruz called him. The Hardin County files, she said. 2 complaints against Harlan from his time there. Both involved women with unstable housing situations. Both were filed and then documented as withdrawn. Both show the withdrawal signatures were obtained under circumstances that are at minimum questionable. At minimum. One of the women told our investigator this morning that Harlan told her if she withdrew the complaint, he wouldn't contact her employer. She withdrew it. A pause. She's been waiting 6 years for someone to ask her that question. Nathan was at the kitchen table. Sophie was at school. The house was quiet. How many total are you looking at? Between Red Creek and Hardin County, we're currently tracking 14 individuals who had documented or undocumented contact with Harlan that fits the pattern. That number may increase. 14. He thought about the grocery bag on the shoulder of Route 9. Can of green beans rolling to the white line. The specific economy of a woman who walked 11 blocks to a grocery store because she didn't have a car. What's the timeline? He asked. We're moving to a formal charging recommendation by end of next week. The DA's office in the adjacent district is handling prosecution. She paused. Will likely be a supplemental investigation into at least 2 officers at the Red Creek Department who appear to have had knowledge of Harlan's conduct and failed to act. Can't discuss that. Okay. Nathan thought for a moment. The woman who had the original recording, Isabel Marquez. What's her status in all this? She's a cooperating witness. That carries certain protections. She lost hours at her job. I'm aware. There are victim witness assistance provisions that may apply. Our office can connect her with the relevant coordinator. She needs someone to actually make the connection, not just tell her it exists. Short silence. I'll pass that along. I'd appreciate it. Cruz hung up. Nathan sat with the phone in his hand for a moment and then set it on the table and looked at the kitchen wall. He thought about the 2 officers who'd known and said nothing, and he tried to be fair about it. He had some idea what that cost standing in an institution you depended on, watching something wrong happen, calculating what speaking up would mean for your job and your family and your standing in a place where your name and your livelihood were tied together. He'd seen it in the teams occasionally, not the extreme version, but the edges of it. The moment where someone looked the other way, because looking required a cost they weren't ready to pay. He didn't excuse it, but he didn't romanticize the difficulty of it either. It was genuinely hard, and the people who'd watched and stayed quiet had made a choice he disagreed with. They were going to face the consequences of it. All of that was simultaneously true. On Friday, a man named Terrence Doyle showed up at Nathan's job site. Nathan was on a roof on the east side of town, residential, straightforward repair work. He'd been up there since 7, and Gary called up to him from the driveway that there was someone to see him. Nathan climbed down and found a compact man in his late 50s standing beside a county-plated vehicle, wearing civilian clothes, but holding himself with the residual posture of someone who'd spent years in uniform. The loose authority of Harlan, the structured bearing of someone who had genuinely earned rank. Mr. Calder, the man said. My name is Terrence Doyle. I'm the county sheriff. Nathan looked at him.
Okay.
I was hoping I could have a few minutes. Gary had made himself scarce. Nathan leaned against the side of the building and waited. Doyle didn't preamble. I want to be straight with you. I'm not here to pressure you, and I'm not here representing Harlan. I want to make that clear. All right. I've been sheriff in this county for 9 years, Doyle said. I became aware of concerns about Harlan's conduct approximately 2 years ago. I want to explain. You don't need to explain anything to me, Nathan said. Doyle stopped. With respect, Nathan added, I'm not the person you need to explain it to. Pause. Doyle looked at him with the particular expression of a man who had prepared for one conversation and found himself in a different one. What I'm trying to say, what you're trying to figure out, Nathan said, leet unkindly. Yes, estetid mand. is whether I'm going to say something to the investigators that makes your situation more complicated than it already is. Doyle was quiet for a moment. He looked at the ground, then back up. It's fine. Nathan pushed off the wall. I testified to what I personally witnessed. I'll do the same in whatever formal process follows. I don't have any interest in making this about you. I should have acted sooner. Yeah, Nathan said. You should have. He said it without particular heat. Just the fact of it. Doyle absorbed it. He nodded, once, the slow nod of someone receiving something they knew they deserved. If there's anything my office can do to support, there's a woman named Isabel Marquez, Nathan said. She has reduced hours at the motel on South Main because her manager got leaned on. She needs those hours back, or equivalent, and she shouldn't have to fight anyone to get them. Doyle looked at him. And there's a woman named Rosa who doesn't have a permanent address and hasn't had one. For a couple of years, Nathan continued. She was the one in the parking lot the other night. She needs a contact at your county services office who will actually answer the phone. Their pause. Doyle pulled out a small notebook. You have a last name for the second woman? Cruz at TBI can connect you. Doyle wrote something. I'll make those calls. Good. Nathan picked up his tool bag. Anything else? Doyle put the notebook away. He looked at Nathan for a moment. You've been in Red Creek, what, a year? About 14 months. And he stopped. Seemed to be reconfiguring what he'd been about to say. You weren't even involved, originally. I drove past something on a county road, Nathan said. Hard to look the other way after that. Doyle seemed to consider that for a moment. Then he extended his hand. Nathan shook it. Doyle got back in his vehicle and drove away. Yes, Gary reappeared from around the corner of the house, carrying 2 water bottles with the studied nonchalance of someone who had definitely been listening. Who was that? County Sheriff, Nathan said. Gary held out a water bottle. Everything okay. Working on it. Isabel came to find Nathan the following week, on a Tuesday, at the community center. Pat had called him in the morning to say that Isabel wanted to talk, and he'd come after work, still in his work clothes, and found her sitting at the same table where they'd sat the first time. Hands around a mug. Different expression than the first time, though. Less carefully controlled. Something had been set down. They called me, she said. The TBI coordinator. Victim witness assistance. She said there may be restitution provisions for documented income losses. Isabel looked at her mug. I didn't know that existed. A lot of things exist that people don't know about until someone tells them. She was quiet for a moment. The motel manager called me yesterday. He apologized. He said he used the word pressured, and he apologized, and he offered me my regular hours back. She paused. He sounded genuinely embarrassed. He was in a hard position, Nathan said. I'm not angry at him. She looked up. I'm angry at the years of it. This specific thing. The years. Nathan didn't say anything to that, because there wasn't anything to say that was adequate, and he'd learned the difference between a statement that wanted a response and one that just needed to be said. How many? She asked. How many people were there? Last I heard, 14 they've identified so far. Isabel looked at the table. She absorbed it the way you absorb information that confirms what you already knew was true, but that you'd spent years wondering if you'd imagined. I thought it was just me, for a long time. That's what he counted on. She was quiet again. Then the other women, the ones in Hardin County. Are they going to have to testify? Some of them, if they're willing. Will it matter? If they do. Nathan looked at her. It already changed things that you did. She considered that. Sandra told me something when I first started coming to the Thursday group. She said the people who get away with things like this don't get away with them because they're powerful. They get away with them because the people they hurt don't have anyone in their corner. She paused. She said the only thing that changes it is when someone with more leverage than the victim decides to use it. Nathan looked at the table. He didn't think of himself as someone with leverage. He'd intervened. He thought of himself as someone who had driven past something on a county road on a Tuesday evening and had not managed to talk himself out of stopping. I'm just a guy who fixes roofs, he said. Isabel looked at him. You're a guy who knows how to pin a 220-pound cop against his own cruiser without breaking anything, she said. That's not the same thing as just a guy who fixes roofs. Pat made a sound from behind the counter that might have been a cough. Nathan felt the particular discomfort of someone who has spent a long time learning not to be defined by a particular version of themselves. The SEAL version, the operator version. He'd been trying for a while to be just the Red Creek version. The one who showed up to the same job and drove the same truck and cut the crusts off sandwiches. It's the same thing, he said. Just the same person, different context. Isabel looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded, slowly. Okay, she said, if you say so. She didn't sound entirely convinced. The formal charging document came down on a Friday afternoon in the third week after the parking lot. Nathan was in his driveway, changing the oil on his truck, when Marcus called. 7 counts, Marcus said. Improper detention, civil rights violations under federal statute, obstruction of a complaint process, coercion of a witness, 2 counts of official misconduct, and 1 count of improper contact with a witness in an active investigation. That last one is from the phone call to Isabel. Nathan set down the oil filter. Federal charges? The civil rights violations kick it to federal jurisdiction. The local DA is still carrying the misconduct counts, but the federal piece is the one that sticks. Nathan leaned against the truck. What happens to the department? 2 officers are under review. One of them already retained an attorney. County is going to have to implement some form of external review process to satisfy the state's terms that's being negotiated. Red Creek PD is going to look very different in 6 months. Wiped his hands on a rag. And Harlan? He's out on personal recognizance pending trial. Surrendered his badge and his service weapon. A pause. His attorney issued a statement this morning. Denied everything. Accused the witnesses of fabricating a conspiracy. Standard. Marcus's voice was dry. The dashcam footage complicates the narrative somewhat. I imagine it does. His attorney also made some noise about your background. The classified blocks. Said the TBI was relying on testimony from an individual with an undisclosed history. Marcus said it neutrally. What did Cruz say? Cruz said the dashcam footage doesn't have a security clearance requirement. He paused. She also said, and I'm quoting, that she'd reviewed the publicly available aspects of your record and found nothing that affected the credibility of your testimony. Diplomatic. She's good at her job. Nathan looked at the oil filter in his hand. 11 years. 7 counts. 1 woman who'd carried a phone for 8 months. 1 parking lot in the rain. It's not going to be clean, he said. Marcus said. It rarely is. It's done. Mostly. The mechanism is running now. Pause. You okay? Nathan thought about it. The honest answer wasn't simple. He was tired. He was relieved in the specific, partial way you're relieved, when a thing you couldn't control has at least moved toward resolution. He was thinking about the 14 women and wondering about the 15th and 16th, who hadn't been found yet. He was thinking about Sophie at the kitchen table asking, is she okay, before she asked anything about him. Yeah, he said, I'm okay. Good. Marcus's voice changed slightly less official. More the version of the man Nathan had argued with in the desert outside Tucson. I'm going to say one thing, and then I'm going to drop it. Okay. You didn't have to do any of this. You could have driven past that road the first night, and nobody would have known. Most people do that. Drive past. Not because they're bad people. Nathan said again. So, a pause. I don't know what you were before you came to Red Creek. What those blocks in your file mean in general terms. Whatever you were then. Marcus stopped, started again. You did this as a guy who fixes roofs and picks his kid up from school. That's the version of you that matters here. Nathan looked at his driveway. His truck. The hummingbird feeder visible around the corner of the house. Some sleep, Marcus, he said. Hung up. He finished the oil change. He washed his hands at the outdoor spigot and stood in the driveway in the afternoon light and let himself, for a moment, not think about anything at all. The mechanism was running. The rest was going to take the time it took. He went inside to start dinner. Dinner that night was chicken and rice, nothing special, the kind of meal that existed to be eaten rather than appreciated. Sophie ate without complaint and told him about a disagreement she'd had with a boy in her class named Dustin, who had argued, incorrectly in her assessment, that sharks were more dangerous than hippos. And Nathan listened and offered the factual support she was looking for. Hips. Yes, by a significant margin. And she received this with the satisfaction of someone whose position has been confirmed by a credible source. He washed the dishes. She dried them. Because they divided it that way. since the first week in Red Creek, and it had become one of those small routines that accumulates meaning over time without anyone deciding it should. She handed him the last bowl, and he put it in the cabinet, and she leaned against the counter. "Is it over?" she asked. He looked at her. "The police thing?" He thought about the charging document. 7 counts. Federal jurisdiction. The mechanism running. "Most of it," he said. "There's a trial. That takes time." She was quiet for a moment. Was it worth it? Nathan looked at his daughter, at the particular directness of her, the way she asked things that cost something to answer honestly, and thought about 14 women, about a prepaid phone in a plastic bag, about Rosa in the rain. He said, "It was worth it." Sophie nodded. She'd already decided her own answer before she asked. He could tell from the way she nodded, confirming rather than receiving. She pushed off the counter and went to get her backpack for the next day's school prep, which she did every night with a consistency that Nathan found both admirable and slightly unnerving in an 8-year-old. Turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark for a moment. Worth it was a complicated accounting. He was aware of that. There were things he'd put at risk that he hadn't had the right to put at risk, starting with the stability he'd promised Sophie when he'd driven that trailer south through Kentucky. Yes, he'd intervened. He'd told himself he was doing it carefully, and he had been careful as the situation allowed, but careful didn't mean safe, and there had been a version of that parking lot on a rainy Sunday night that ended differently. A version where Harlan was faster, or angrier, or less calculated in the moment. A version where Nathan miscalculated the dashcam angle. He thought about that version sometimes. Not obsessively, just enough to stay honest about what he'd done. He went to bed and slept better than he had in 3 weeks. October came to Red Creek, the way it always did in the Tennessee Valley suddenly. Overnight, the trees going from green to burning without sufficient warning. Nathan drove to work in the mornings through roads lined with red and yellow, and the particular orange that existed only in the 3 weeks before the leaves fell. And he thought sometimes that he hadn't noticed autumn properly in 11 years of deployments in Vasley's life, and that noticing it now felt like something returned rather than something new. The trial date was set for February. Nathan knew this from Marcus, who called occasionally with updates delivered in the efficient shorthand of someone who understood that Nathan wanted information without ceremony. The federal civil rights charges were being led by the U.S. Attorney's Office out of Nashville. The state misconduct counts were being prosecuted by the adjacent district DA, Adler, who had apparently found his footing after the deposition and was reported to be building a case with the focused energy of someone who understood what it meant professionally to be the person who prosecuted this correctly. Harlan had entered a not guilty plea. His attorney, a man named Garrett Foss, who appeared occasionally in local news with the practiced composure of someone who represented people in complicated situations for a living, issued statements that were carefully constructed around the classified gaps in Nathan's record, and the idea that his client had been targeted by a coordinated campaign of false accusation. Yes, he'd intervened. Foss was good enough to know that the dashcam footage undermined the physical confrontation narrative, so he mostly that and focused on the character of the witnesses. It didn't get much traction. 14 witnesses with consistent accounts and documented incidents across 4 counties had a weight that character arguments couldn't reduce to a manageable size. Nathan followed it, the way he followed most things. He couldn't directly control enough to stay informed, not enough to make it the center of his days. He had roofs to fix. He had a daughter in 3rd grade who was learning long division and had opinions about it that she expressed at length. He had Rook, who was developing a mild but dignified attachment to the hummingbird feeder and stood watching it from the back porch, with the patient attention of a creature who has decided that whatever was in that feeder was worth monitoring. In late October, Pat called and asked if Nathan would come speak to a veterans outreach program that was operating out of the Methodist Church on Thursday evenings, the same one where Sandra ran the Thursday group. Coincidence that was actually just the economy of a small town where resources concentrated in available spaces. The program was new, put together by a retired Army medic named Flores who had moved to Red Creek 6 months earlier and was trying to build something for the veterans in the county who had come home to a place that didn't have much infrastructure for what they'd come home with. Nathan said he'd think about it. He went on the third Thursday in October, telling himself he was just going to listen. He stayed for 2.5 hours. There were 9 men in the room, ranging in age from early 20s to mid-60s, with the particular mix of hypervigilance and careful social calibration that Nathan recognized from the inside. Flores ran the meeting with the low-key competence of someone who understood that this kind of room didn't respond well to structure imposed from outside. What worked was space and consistency, and someone who showed up every week without making it a performance. They talked about work and sleep and the specific difficulty of explaining to people who loved them why certain sounds or situations required a response that the situation didn't seem to warrant. They talked about this with a combination of directness and deflection that Nathan found entirely familiar. Yes, he didn't say much that first night. He introduced himself when Flores asked him to, said and left the classified blocks where they were. A couple of the men looked at him with the particular recognition of people who understood what those gaps in a biography usually meant, and they didn't ask, and he was grateful. He went back the following Thursday, and the one after that, brought the first real cold, and with it, a sequence of events that settled things in ways that trials and charging documents couldn't, because they were quieter and less official and more durable. The first was Rosa. Sheriff Doyle had followed through. On the call, Nathan had asked him to make Nathan hadn't expected him to, or had expected it in the way you expect things from institutions, which is with a kind of provisional skepticism. But a county services coordinator named Ellen had reached out to Pat, who had passed the contact to Isabel, who had known approximately where Rosa moved between in the months since the parking lot. They found her. Ellen met her. The process was slow and imperfect and bureaucratic in the ways that processes for people without addresses always were, but it moved. By mid-November, Rosa had a temporary housing placement in a county program 30 miles from Red Creek, not permanent. Ideal. A door, and someone whose job it was to check that the door stayed open. Nathan found out about this from Isabel, who told him over coffee at the diner in the second week of November. She'd become the one who tracked these things, not because anyone had asked her to, but because she was the person those calls came to, and she'd answered them. Ellen said the process usually takes longer, Isabel said. She said she put it at the top of her stack personally. Called her, Nathan said. I know. Ellen told me. Isabel wrapped both hands around her mug. He came by the center last week, by the way. Doyle. Nathan looked up. He didn't make a big thing of it. Came in, talked to Pat for a while, left a county resources guide and his direct line. She paused. He didn't mention you. He wouldn't. She was quiet for a moment. He looked tired. He's got a department that's being restructured under state supervision, and 2 of his officers under review, and a county that's watching all of it, Nathan said. He should look tired. Do you think he's a good man? Nathan thought about that. I think he made a bad decision for a long time, and he's dealing with it. That's different from being a good man or a bad man. Isabel considered this. Is that what you think about the officers who are under review? I don't think about them much, Nathan said. It wasn't entirely true, but it was close enough. She looked out the diner window at Main Street, where the November light was thin, and the maple trees had mostly lost their leaves, and 2 women were walking with strollers, and a man was loading boxes into a hardware store, and the town was exactly what it looked. Like small and going about its morning without drama. I keep waiting for it to feel like something changed, she said. The town is different now. Does it? She was quiet for a moment. When I walk down this street, I feel different. She paused. Know if that's the town or me. Might be both, Nathan said. She nodded slowly, like she was willing to accept that as an answer. The second thing happened in early December, when one of the 2 officers under review, a man named Purcell, 30s, had been with the Red Creek Department for 6 years, contacted Agent Cruz and asked about cooperation. Purcell had a wife and a daughter and a mortgage on a house 2 streets from Nathan's, which Nathan discovered because Red Creek was 4,000 people and information moved the way it moved in small places, through the specific network of proximity and shared spaces that made privacy theoretical. Purcell had seen things, not the worst of it. He'd come into the department after the Hardin County incidents, but enough. 2 complaints that passed through his hands and got routed somewhere they shouldn't have been. Troll log entry he'd corrected because Harlan had asked him to, and that he'd corrected because Harlan was senior, and because it was easier, and because nothing had seemed the word he apparently used to Cruz was actionable. Nothing had seemed actionable at the time. He gave a full account. Everything he'd seen, everything he'd let pass, everything he understood now that he'd chosen not to understand then. It wasn't heroism. It was someone who had looked at the shape of their own choices and found the view uncomfortable enough to do something about it 6 years later, under the specific pressure of consequences. Nathan didn't forgive him for the 6 years. He didn't particularly need to. That accounting wasn't his to do. What mattered was that Purcell's account added to the case in 2 specific ways that Cruz confirmed would strengthen the obstruction counts. What mattered was that another voice was now on record saying this happened and I saw it. Came 5. 5 became 12. 14. And now, counting Purcell, a 15th voice speaking into a recorder in a TBI field office on a Tuesday morning. Sophie's winter concert was the second week of December. She played recorder again, the jazz piece she'd mentioned in October, which Mr. Eds had indeed introduced, and which was genuinely harder than the fall performance, more interesting rhythmically, and requiring a kind of attention to timing that Nathan could hear in the way she practiced at home, sometimes stopping mid-phrase and starting again from the beginning with the patient exasperation of someone who understood what correct sounded like and hadn't gotten there yet. She got there on the night. Not perfectly, she came in slightly late on a turnaround in the second section, and he could see from the third row that she knew it immediately, the slight flicker of her eyes. But she got there. She played the rest of it with the steady focus of someone who had decided that one missed beat wasn't the whole of the piece. Nathan sat in the gymnasium with the other parents and felt the particular full those moments, the ones that were small enough to be overlooked, but that accumulated into the actual texture of a life. Yes, the woman 2 seats down who laughed too loudly at the wrong moment. The child in the front row who forgot his part and improvised something that was genuinely not bad. The way the gymnasium lights made everything look slightly more golden than it was. Thought about Claire at these moments, with the particular weight that he'd carried for the first year after her death. That weight had changed shape over time, become less acute and more present in a different way, the way things settle when they stop being raw. He thought about her the way you think about someone you loved and lost, which is with a kind of gratitude and grief that are so mixed together they can't be separated, and you eventually stop trying. Sophie would have played that jazz piece for her mother with the same focused determination. Claire would have laughed at the missed beat and applauded regardless. He applauded. Sophie found him in the audience with her eyes when the applause started, and he could deciding whether to smile like it was a big deal or be casual about it. She went with casual. He understood that. After the concert, parking lot. Yes, Sophie walked beside him with her recorder case, and Maya walked on the other side, talking at speed about the third-grade version of everything. And Nathan listened to both of them and felt the cold air on his face and thought, this is the thing I came here for. The Harlan situation. Not the parking lot. Not any of it. This specific parking lot on this specific cold night with his daughter and her friend and the sound of other families calling to each other across the cars. January was quiet. The restructuring of the Red Creek Police Department proceeded under state supervision. A new complaint review process was implemented, independent, external, reported directly to the county commissioner, rather than through internal channels. The local paper ran a piece on it that was 3 columns long and used the phrase overdue reforms in the second paragraph, which was accurate if understated. Purcell resigned from the department in early January. He wasn't prosecuted, cooperation had secured that, and Cruz had been clear in her communications that his account was part of what made the obstruction counts airtight. He got a job doing security work for a private firm in Knoxville. Nathan heard this through the specific information network of Red Creek and didn't feel much about it in either direction. The second officer, under review, a man named Garth, who had been with the department longer and whose involvement was more significant than Purcell's, did not cooperate and was terminated following the review. His situation was ongoing, and Nathan stopped tracking it. Isabel got her regular hours back at the motel in November, as the manager had promised. In January, she started working 2 days a week at the community center, helping Pat with intake, the paperwork side of it, identifying what resources existed for people who came in with situations that looked like Isabel's situation had looked 3 years ago. She was good at it. She knew what the system's gaps looked like from the inside, which was a different kind of knowledge than anything you got from training. She called Nathan on a Wednesday afternoon in the second week of January. "Talk to one of the Hardin County women," she said. "Her name is Delia. She's coming to testify in February." "That's good," Nathan said. "She's scared." "I know." "Told her." Isabel stopped. Started again. "I told her that I was scared too and that I did it anyway, and that it was hard, but that on the other side of it things were different. That the difference was real." She paused. "I don't know if that was the right thing to say." "Think it was the right thing to say." You can't know that," he said. "But it was true. That's generally a good starting point." A silence. "She asked me how I got up the nerve. The first time. Handing you the phone. What did you tell her?" "I told her someone showed up who seemed like they might actually be trustworthy, and that I decided to test the hypothesis." A pause that had something in it Nathan couldn't quite name. "She asked how I knew you were trustworthy." "What did you say?" "I said you picked up my groceries." Nathan looked at his kitchen wall. "That's a low bar." "Not for everybody," Isabel said. He didn't have a response to that, so he didn't give one. The trial began in February on a Monday, in the federal courthouse in Nashville. Nathan drove up the night before and stayed in a chain hotel near the courthouse that had a vending machine on every floor and carpet that had seen better decades. He ate dinner at a diner within walking distance, eggs and toast, nothing special, and sat with his coffee and watched the Nashville traffic moving past the window and thought about the last time he'd been in a city this size. The drive to Red Creek 14 months ago. The trailer. Sophie asleep with his jacket under her head. He hadn't expected to testify until the third day of the trial, but the schedule moved and they called him on the second afternoon. He walked into that courtroom in his good clothes, a gray jacket he'd bought specifically for this, the kind of purchase that felt strange in a town where he mostly wore work clothes, and he sat in the witness stand and looked at Foss, Harlan's attorney, with the same neutral expression he'd have given a debrief room. And he answered every question he was asked in the same precise, factual way he'd been answering questions since October. Fossey tried the classified blocks angle again, asked Nathan to confirm his specific operational history. Nathan gave the same answer he'd given in the deposition. Federal NDA, can't discuss. The publicly accessible record stands on its own. Fossey tried to make this sound like evasion. The federal prosecutor, a composed woman named Hargrove, who had prepared well and showed it, redirected on the dashcam footage, on Nathan's clear and unambiguous account of the Route 9 incident, on his prior complaint to the TBI and the timeline that followed. Foss' best moment was a question he asked near the end, the kind of question designed to land with the jury, even if it didn't produce the answer the attorney wanted. "Mr. Calder, you've described yourself as a neighbor who witnessed something concerning. But you're not really just a neighbor, are you?" Nathan looked at him. "I'm a resident of Red Creek County who witnessed the events I testified to. You have specialized training. You made tactical decisions that evening in the parking lot. You contacted a TBI investigator you knew personally. You coordinated the evidence submission." Fossey spread his hands. "That's not what a normal civilian does." Nathan thought about it for a moment. He thought about what Marcus had said on the phone in the driveway. "You did this as a guy who fixes roofs." He thought about Sophie at the kitchen table, saying, "Is she okay?" before she asked about anything else. "I did what I was able to do," Nathan said. The woman who had been carrying that recording for 8 months, she did what she was able to do. The women in Hardin County who came forward, they did what they were able to do. He paused. "Whatever my background is, I wasn't the most important person in this room's history of the case. Even close." Foss didn't have a follow-up for that. He moved on. The verdict came on a Friday, 3 weeks into the trial. Nathan was back in Red Creek when Marcus called. He was on the back porch with his coffee. Early afternoon, the February cold still carrying some actual edge to it. Marcus said. "All 7 counts. Jury took a day and a half." Nathan put his coffee down on the porch railing. "How many of them?" 6 to 8 years on the federal civil rights charges. pending sentencing. The state misconduct counts run concurrent. The sentencing hearing is in April. 6 to 8 years. Nathan thought about what 11 years of operating without consequence looked like versus 6 to 8 years of consequence, and understood that the math didn't balance and never would. The victims? He asked. Victim impact statements are submitted for sentencing. Delia submitted one. Isabel submitted one. A pause. Rosa submitted one. Ellen from County Services helped her with it. Nathan hadn't known that yet. Set. He stood on the back porch and felt something that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite satisfaction, but was in the neighborhood of both the specific feeling of a thing that needed to be done having been. Imperfectly and slowly and at cost, but done. Hargrove wants me to let you know, Marcus said, that the victim witness coordinator cited your early involvement as a material factor in the case achieving the breadth it did. 14 witnesses, 4 counties. She said without the initial TBI contact and the evidence submission, the investigation would likely have stayed local and been suppressed. Nathan looked at the tree line. She said to say thank you, Marcus added. Tell her thank you back, Nathan said, for doing it right. Marcus laughed a short, real laugh. I'll pass that along. April arrived, and the sentencing came down at the high end of the range. Nathan didn't drive to Nashville for it. He followed the news on his phone during his lunch break, sitting in his truck outside a job site in the east part of the county, and he read the statement the judge had issued about the nature of the abuse of power and the particular harm caused by those sworn to protect targeting the most vulnerable. And he thought it was well said, and that it probably came too late for some of what it addressed, and that the two things were both true simultaneously. He put his phone away and ate his lunch. In the weeks that followed, Red Creek settled back into what it was. Water Tower still said Wildcats in faded paint. The diner still had its grudge against Mondays. Gary Dellum still didn't ask questions he didn't need the answers to. The Garcia's dog still barked at dinner time. Some things changed. The independent review process for police complaints had real teeth. Now the county commissioner had appointed an external board with actual authority, which was more than most counties that size had managed. A new deputy was hired to fill the gaps left by the resignations, a young woman from Hardin County with a clean record and a manner that suggested she understood what the department needed to become. Sheriff Doyle had lost weight and looked older than he had in September. Yes, he'd intervened, and when Nathan passed him on the street, they nodded at each other with the specific acknowledgement of men who had been in the same situation from different angles and were still figuring out what that meant. Isabel became a fixture at the community center. Full-time, officially, but present in the way that people become necessary to places 2 days a week, expanding to 3. Her knowledge of the system's blind spots making her better at intake than anyone who'd come to it from its outside. Pat offered her a paid coordinator position in May, and she took it. When she told Nathan, she said it simply, without ceremony, the way she said most things.
Good.
Pat says I can set my own hours mostly. That's good too, a pause. I'm not sure I'm qualified. What it looks like from the inside, Nathan said. That's more useful than qualified. She was quiet for a moment. There's a woman coming in Thursday. Situation that looks like mine did. Harassment from someone in a position of authority. She's scared to file anything. What are you going to tell her? Isabel thought about it, that she has more options than she thinks, and that the first step is just letting someone else see what she's carrying. Nathan looked at her. Yeah, he said, that's exactly right. Summer came back to Red Creek. Sophie finished 3rd grade with a report card that Nathan read twice and put on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a Tennessee state outline that she'd bought herself at a gas station in March because she thought it was funny. She grew half an inch between April and June and informed him one morning that her shoes didn't fit, which he verified, yes, intervened, and they drove to the shoe store in the next town over, and she chose sneakers that were marginally more expensive than the ones she'd had, and he bought them without comment. On a Saturday in late June, in the backyard, Sophie doing something with chalk on the patio, Nathan cleaning the back porch area, which had accumulated the specific entropy of a winter, spent mostly ignoring it when Sophie looked up from her chalk work. Yeah, why did you stop that night? The first night on Route 9, and set down the broom. He'd been wondering when this question would arrive. It had been circling since October, visible in the way Sophie sometimes looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. He sat down on the porch step. She put down her chalk and came and sat beside him. Rook came and lay in front of them on the warm patio concrete, with the dignity of a dog who understood that some moments were sitting down moments. I saw something that wasn't right, Nathan said. But you didn't know her. So why'd you stop? He looked at the backyard. The uncut grass that he needed to deal with this weekend. Bird feeder. The left-tilted porch they'd just sat down on. When I was in the Navy, he said slowly, the job was. There were a lot of complicated situations. Everything was clear. You couldn't always tell who was who or what the right thing was. He paused. But sometimes things were very simple. Someone needed help. We could help. That was it. He looked at her. I guess I saw something simple. Sophie thought about this. But it wasn't that simple. You were out in the rain. That whole thing with the police officer. So it got complicated. Yeah, it did. She was quiet for a moment. Was it still worth it? Even when it got complicated. Nathan thought about 14 women, about a phone call in the rain, about a prepaid phone that had been carried for 8 months because a woman hadn't known whether anyone would come. Complicated part was just getting to the simple part, he said. Isabel needed someone to show up, so I showed up. He paused. The rest of it was just what came with that. Sophie leaned against his arm. She was quiet for a while. In the particular way she was quiet when she was thinking about something seriously, which she did more than he sometimes remembered to account for. I think, she said finally, that most people know when something's wrong. They just decide it's not their problem. Nathan looked at her. And then it stays wrong, she said, because nobody makes it their problem. He sat with that for a moment. 8 years old, and she'd reduced it to its clearest form in 2 sentences. He didn't say anything, because he didn't have anything to add to it. She picked up her chalk and went back to her drawing. He sat on the step a while longer, in the June heat, with Rook in front of him, and the sound of the neighborhood going about its Saturday, a lawnmower somewhere, a car radio, somebody's kid calling to somebody, and he thought about all the roadsides, in all the places where something wrong was waiting for someone to stop. He thought about what his daughter had just said. He thought about the fact that she was going to grow into a person who understood that the world improved specifically in the moments when someone chose not to keep driving. Was the thing that mattered. Not the 7 counts. Classified blocks. Not the parking lot in the rain. Any of it. Except as it pointed to that. The next generation. Knowing what the choice looked like. 'Cause someone had made it where they could see. He got up and got the lawnmower out of the shed. The grass wasn't going to cut itself. Started at the far corner and worked his way back toward the house. And the sun was warm on his back, and Sophie's chalk drawings covered half the patio in colors he couldn't see from here but knew were there. Rook watched the hummingbird feeder from the porch with his quiet, patient attention, the supper Schinderminensen, and the summer afternoon went on the way summer afternoons do, indifferent to everything important that had happened in it. Just steady and bright and real. Strength isn't the absence of fear or the presence of power, it's the decision, made in full view of the costs, to stand between harm and someone who can't stand alone. That decision is available to anyone. The only question is whether you stop the truck.